Great to have you here. We've got a wonderful hour here for us to have an intense exchange around what we're doing on innovations for economic paradigm shift. We want to thank Catalyst 2030. I hope for making this possible. I hope all of you are involved and become members. So let's turn to what our agenda is today. We have an introduction to this session. So going over this agenda today, we're going to be talking about what the working group, it's the next Economies Innovation Working Group, is doing around the economy. Our goal is to connect with you and what innovations you might be working on or interested in, and to encourage you to participate in our working group and to help it work for you in a way that's meaningful. So we have within the working group 3 subgroups, and we'll be hearing from each of them, and then we'll be going into breakout groups for about 15 minutes, and you can pick one of these subgroups to go and have a further discussion about, whichever one you find most relevant to and exciting for you. And then we'll come back and have some reflections about next steps. So with that, I'd like to encourage all of you to write in the chat where you're calling in from, what your geographic location is, so we can get a bit of knowledge about where everyone is. I'm speaking a couple of hours west of Boston, in the woods by a pond, where I spend a lot of my time. London, UK, Colombia, yay, Paula, welcome. Great, Hungary, great to see you. Okay, let's have a poll now. We'd like to learn more about what your interests are, what you come here to this meeting with as a particular interest in terms of the economy. So maybe you could answer this question we have. You can choose more than one, but then we'll know more about you. Yay. Economic governance, that's great to see. So it seems to be the most powerful one for this group. Finance is up there as well, and narrative. Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's keep that in mind as we're going along. So let's now take a look at what our setting is for our working group. At this particular time, we're seeing massive changes and massive crises. So some of them are good in terms of the pace of innovation that we're seeing, and I think all of you are part of that. But from many perspectives, the current economic structure is driving the environmental crisis and the social inequity. So how can we change that situation is basically what the working group is set up to address. Next, please. So we can think of the era up to the 2007, 2009 crisis.
Cardiff Central.
Whoops.
Thank you for wearing a face covering.
Please mute yourself. Until the financial crisis, when I led a project called the International or the Global Finance Lab at that time, and when we talked with people, there were only 3 different types of economies they could talk about. It was either in terms of communism, socialism, or capitalism. These are all 19th century ideas. But since then, we've had a real burst in activity. Johnny, could you show some of the names that we've got here coming up since that we've been looking at here. So people are looking at the economy now in terms of being a regenerative economy, circular, doughnut. These are just a few of over 35 different frames for the economy that people are working on. So this is sort of the basis of the environment that we've got here. It's an extremely rich and robust burst of energy around innovation. I'm going to ask if the Western local meeting can please mute yourself. Thank you. Next, please. So we say, well, there's all of these new names and labels. What are they about? And there is a study that was done with somebody who I work with closely and looked at all of these to say, well, from a values point of view, what are they about? And are they really sharing something? And she found that indeed there are these values that she is found as common to the way these different labels are aspiring for their designing their future. So despite being this large number of labels, there are these common elements. One is stewardship for the whole. So thinking of economies where we're stewarding the whole in terms of the people who are employees, but also the whole in terms of nature and human activity. And then we have co-creating collective value. So it's not so much about somebody telling somebody what to do, but engaging in this spirit of co-development of our economy and the services and production that we have. A clear trend in that. Governance through cosmolocalism. So what this means is finding new governance approaches that will be sensitive to the local, but don't forget about the global. We don't all just want to live in a village economy. We want to be connected to the world, but how do we, so there is concern for that. And we're still trying to figure out, of course, how to do that. And then there's these common terms of regeneration, reciprocity, and circularity that tell us something about how the economy should be running and what it should be attending to, that it's not any longer just good enough to think of yourself as being sustainable, but it's about regeneration so that we recognize that we have had a very negative impact in many ways, and we want to really restore and regenerate as well. Reciprocity in terms of ending exploitive relationships, circularity, being mindful of circularity in terms of environmental concerns in our production of goods and services. And then relationships, connectedness, rather than treating each other simply in an impersonal way through which we can get our own environmental goals and well-being attended to really build structures and processes that are embedded in the design of the economy that honors the relationship and connectedness. And then finally, we have this equitable markets and trade. So again, around this concept of equitable negotiations, equitable relationships, and the way we set up our structures in the economy. So we have these 6 different qualities and values that have been identified and provide a way for us to think about whether the innovations actually support these values or not. Now, Catalyst 2030 has its own values. And when we take a look at those, we can see that there's actually a lot of congruence here. So Catalyst 2030 indeed could be considered one of these entities that we looked at around what the values are that are coming together to be the basis of the new economy. So what are innovations that we're seeing that lead to this next economy? So we're seeing, for example, pre-competitive agreements. this is something, whoops, a bit fast, but going through the, in the fisheries where I'm doing a lot of work, where people who are normally in competition with one another are getting together to form groups that are actually working to ensure the health of the seabed and the oceans, and taking on responsibility outside of a traditional governance model to ensure that the seafood stocks are healthy. And then we have new business structures, such as the well-known Benefits Corporation, as it's called in the United States. It's called different things in different locations, but basically it's saying, let's create a stakeholder rather than shareholder organizations. This is being extended in New Zealand recently to include nature, so that we actually have mountains and rivers that are that have legal personhood in that country. So there's a lot that's being done in how to organize new business organizations. And then we have new products such as the prevention derivatives. So traditional insurance is structured around repair after forest fires. In California, Australia, now insurance companies, neighborhoods, and governments are getting together to try to prevent forest fires. So rather than spending billions and billions on repairing after the forest fire, is there ways that we can actually prevent the forest fires by investing some of those billions in prevention rather than in repairing after the damage is done? And then we have a lot of new stories to support this new economy. Stories about how the world works to shift from it being all about GNP to including well-being economies, to include happiness, and stories about that being the purpose, and then stories about how we actually support that as an outcome. And we have next economy stock markets. Particularly, we've been working with Thomas Carruthers, who's opening the new social stock exchange, probably end of this year, early next year. And he's opening that stock exchange as an entity that has its own theory of change. That is, it's a stock exchange to support change, and any listing on that stock exchange will have to have a theory of change, so that this will, in fact, be a way to support change, because a listing will be assessed not just against its financials, but about whether or not it's realizing its change goals. And we have new currencies. A lot of these are cryptocurrencies. Some of them are very old economies, such as Bitcoin, which uses lots of energy and benefits very few people. But other ones, such as seeds, are creating new approaches for collective ownership, new economic governance structures for currencies to support communities to have more control over their own economic well-being. And then we have something called ecosystem services. How do we integrate ourselves into nature and honor nature in terms of financially rewarding people who are keeping nature healthy, to provide us healthy water, for example, by maintaining forest covers. And we also have this topic of new production processes, particularly associated with regenerative agriculture as an illustration. And then we have new marketplaces that are also happening. Certainly Amanda Kessel and Catalyst Market are examples of evolving new equitable markets. So we looked at this broad range of innovations and thought, how can we strategically be able to work on this? So our vision, just to summarize then, is that social innovators will be realizing their systems change and innovation potential to bring to life all of these new economic approaches that integrate these new value systems. And the working group is about identifying these new innovations. So last year we identified nearly 100 of them. We're continuing to do that. to connect people and initiatives, to be able to work together to give these innovations scale and size, and to actually work through Catalyst 2030 to be able to promote all of this to Catalyst 30 as part of its aspirations to reach the 2030 goals. So with that big picture, we did some research last year, and I'm going to let Johnny tell you about that because it's been helpful for us to be able to set our agenda and strategy. Johnny.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Steve, for that run through. So I'm just going to bring you through quite quickly how we were looking at trying to link up all these different innovations. Because as Steve's just ran through, there's so many different types of innovations, and how do we see them working towards one economy, sorry. And to do that, we were researching what an economic operating infrastructure might look like. So that infrastructure that is supporting this new economy to evolve and to thrive and to flourish, what might that look like? And what might those innovations within that infrastructure look like? And so to do this, we were looking into 7 different typologies, and I'll run through those in a second. But within those typologies, thinking, okay, so with these categories, how might we imagine forms taking place? So I'm going to run through the structure of this infrastructure to try and give you an idea, and then present how we're using this infrastructure within our working group setting, within some subgroups that we've made. So the first of these, sorry, I'm just going to quickly come out of share because something is going up with my PowerPoint. I'll come back. Okay, sorry about that. So the first of these categories, right at the end of our infrastructure, is products and services. So what are those economic outputs for purchase that would be present in our new economy? And these would be things such as zero waste innovations, ecosystem services, and financial products. So, the outputs of our infrastructure. And then these types of innovations, they're supported and influenced by business structures. So new arrangements for organizing entities for economic production, for example. And certain forms of these may be B Corps, some of you will be aware with these, cooperatives, and so on. And then on top of that, we have new currencies, new metrics, and new markets. So the mechanisms for supporting the exchanges within the economy. And these are new categories that we've again been researching, and forms within that have been local currencies, cryptocurrencies, within metrics, new business standards, GPIs, investment impact measures. And then within markets, new platforms like Steve just mentioned, or new communities, and product consumer direct exchanges. So that's our sort of mechanisms. Then going above that again, when we start to talk about how we're going to finance this new economy. So we were looking into forms such as crowdfunding, social stock markets, for example. And then these are supported by new forms of governance. A lot of you said that you were interested in these. So pre-competitive agreements, multi-stakeholder governance, for example, and policy councils. And then right at the top of this infrastructure that we are researching, maybe the driving force for a new economy, is those new forms of narratives, those new innovations that are telling a new story of the role of economic activity around the world. And some examples of this, education, narrative research, and cultural shift campaigns. So that's a lot to take in, I know, but this is just trying to outline this overall infrastructure that we were looking at this meta level. And of course, as well, we've just run through from an output side of the infrastructure, but each of these categories also supports the other way. But then what we did as a working group is said, right, we've looked into this typology, and we've looked into some of the dynamics of this typology, but how can we best focus our energy? How can we look into identifying innovations within these more, and seeing how we might start to weave in the different categories, because there's a lot going on here. As a working group, we're not going to be able to hold this just in one space. So we sent out a survey to the members within the working group to ask which categories they might like to pursue further. and we might like to start looking into within a project setting or different focuses. And the output of that survey was that we as a working group were interested in narrative, business structures, and finance as 3 topics within this overall picture for us to pursue further, to create separate projects into, and just to learn a little bit more about the dynamics within these and how we might start to weave them together with the long-term vision that we would do so for the whole infrastructure and start to build it in that way. So I'm going to pass back to Steve to introduce the 3 subgroups and the co-leads for those subgroups.
Unmuted. Thanks so much, Johnny. So the exciting thing here is that Catalyst 2030 embodies in its membership, its growing membership, this drive for innovation. So how can we support that to come to life in a powerful way? So with these 3 working groups, we'd like to first take each of them at a time, one at a time, to show you where we are with them. And I'd like to first of all go to Leslie, who is leading the working group around narrative. Welcome, Leslie. You're from Calgary, I think.
I am.
In Canada.
On the land of the Niitsitapi, the original lands of the Blackfoot Confederation. Yes.
Thank you. So why did you want to become involved in the narrative issue?
Well, professionally, I'm an anthropologist, which means I get really intrigued by why we as humans do what we do, and the way that we come to coming into the world around our beliefs and our traditions and our actions are very much based on the stories that we tell ourselves. And the stories, the mythology that supports our culture, our family, our social network, all of that is really based on significant, many unconsciously defined narratives that then undergird what we actually look like and show up like and respond to. So I thought that when we start to look at narratives in the context of the emerging new economy, the new economic story, when we start looking at what's happening in different places around the world, when we are looking at the types of what I would say life-affirming, life-forming change that is being asked of us, then best to look at the narratives that we are using to define where we are, because that's the place that we all need to start, is where are we now? What are the narratives that are informing our way of thinking about the world? Is it in chaos or is it going fine? Thank you very much. Any of our dispositions.
Sorry, can you pick a particular narrative that you see shifting right now with regards to the economy and the way people are thinking about it?
Well, I think that immediately right now, one of the narratives is the introduction of war into the world, and the narrative of how monies that would have been placed into climate action are now being placed into a war. I mean, that to me is a more immediate narrative, where the concern is that we were having enough of crises on our hands to place funds where it needed to be, and now we're placing it into a much needed attack that's being made in terms of our democratic world. You know, one of the narratives around the economy that I find living here where I do in Alberta is that the war in Ukraine has put a pressure point on oil and gas and the supply of oil and gas. And so from a province that was really devastated by, you know, very low oil a barrel funds, their new narrative is oil and gas is now the king again. And that's how quickly these narratives change. So I'm now living in a place where we are paying enormous amounts at the pump. We're doing that because we now need to look differently at our source of where fuel is coming from. And it's one of our stands to support the Ukraine. Listen how complicated that narrative is, that me paying more at the pump is okay because it's supporting others who need to be, freed and somewhat fight other war type, the Putin structure. And yet all of that is taking away from those funds that were initially going to be placed into climate mitigation, climate action.
So can you just quickly give us some sense of what you're doing? I know Catalyst 2030 has been working on narrative itself and what the Catalyst 2030 narrative is.
Yeah.
What is the working group planning on doing, and what is it doing?
We wanted to actually understand narrative, because it's like anything. It's a very interesting dynamic, just as I mentioned, where we started with the narrative around climate and around Catalyst 2030 and the prevailing elements to look at has been changed in the matter of months. So we recognize that it's a very fast changing reality that we have to respond and work to. So we wanted to understand what really is narrative, where does it come from, how does it originate, and what is the difference between a narrative that we use as a means to just do our daily thing to a narrative that changes the way we do what we do. What is the role of narrative in changing our action, in changing fundamentally our beliefs about a certain situation and therefore what we do? So we decided to actually explore narratives in many forms. And we had the pleasure of having Cynthia Rayner, who is doing the narratives research for Catalyst, come and spend time with us looking at the narrative research that she's been doing, and where her narrative was showing how people define their narrative very much around their relationship to resources. So where's the defining meme that people use to create their narrative, and it's access to resources that became a part of that narrative.
And if you could just talk about the projects that you are working on then.
So we looked at one of the projects that came into our group was a look at a way of a multimedia narrative, which is an initiative that's by Jack Sim out of Singapore. And Jack has a passion for changing the narrative of how we on this planet are working with the economy and the resources in the economy. And the title of his narrative is called The Shit Economy. And he's been looking at how does he bring that narrative in through a novel, a written form, in through a video media, which is a film form, and into a curriculum that can be taken to schools and help children to learn about the shifting nature of the economy, of the consumption economy, and shifting it into a more regenerative economy. We in one of the projects that is sort of highlighting our space right now, and will be for the next few months, is called the Regenerative Videoscape. And what we are doing is looking at what does regeneration really mean when it comes to life in your place in the world. We know that you've mentioned, Steve, just now, regenerative agriculture, but we know that regeneration is moving in to everything from fashion to fisheries to to villages, into pharmaceuticals. Interestingly enough, it's one of those ubiquitous elements that now unfortunately could become a buzzword before it does the real work that it's designed to do. And so the project that we are looking at is a crowdsourced video, 3 to 5 minutes, a campaign that will go around the world for people to tell us their story of regeneration from whatever place and space, age, and profession, and village from where they come. And the intention of that is to really gather the storytelling of what is the underneath narrative that's emerging around the world when it comes to regeneration. And we want it told in visual storytelling so that it can be in first voice.
Wonderful, thank you, very dynamic. And now let's move to David Parejo and Rupa Mehta. They've been taking leadership with the business structures work. So we'd like to hear from you about what you're doing and in the business structures work. David, you started with this last November. So, and then we got Rupa, who has brought a lot of energy to this as well. But why don't you start off, David, with a bit of your vision about this working group?
Oh, thank you, Steve. Yes, well, as an econologist, economists that have been working in banking for a little while, and now, supporting ecology and the SDGs, I thought, okay, how can we bring the best of both worlds? Because we are in a transition. Everybody knows we accept everybody that we are in an energy transition. Well, I think we are also in a financial and a new funding transition. So the idea with this was trying to see how we can be inclusive, bring all these, traditional models into something that is willing to emerge with new structures, getting together also, reconnecting, let's say, with nature, because it's one of the core values, as you said earlier, people and nature at the center. So that is one of the ideas, bringing the best of both worlds and trying to play a role into this transition into a more regenerative world.
Great, thank you. And Rupa, maybe you can tell us about what your concerns are with the traditional business structures and why you see that they've got to change, and maybe an example of something you see.
Well, I come, like I say every time, is from the fair trade world, and which are, so my whole, I think for 4 decades now, I've seen how, fair trade, social enterprises have worked. And I see that is sort of moving towards the business structures that we are looking at. And I think it's a no-brainer for anyone in this room to see the impact of, traditional, conventional business entities whose power and control seems to be just growing, and it's impacting us, the world, and the people in such, and planet, of course, in such a negative way. The impact of it is there for all of us to see, that the kind of social economic inequities which exists, and and even the political power that backs these businesses. So this is what drew me to the group, because I really felt that what we needed is a paradigm shift. We can no longer look at it as something that is marginal or that something that is incremental change. It has to be much more total. And I think because of my own experiences and my work experiences, you see this as a reality. You don't need to accept the state of affairs. If you are a large enough community of people who are thinking to, who are working towards that change. And like I say, it's an internal shift before it can be an external shift. So even if we start with this group here, I think we all carry back bits of each other into our work, into our life. And I think the goal, and what is my vision, which I see, that if we are able to really mainstream these decentralized business structure and create the kind of abundance and well-being which you spoke about, Steve, and which is for people and which is of course for nature, and very importantly, and we've spoke about it even before this session, is to recognize the connectedness of ourselves with others and with every living being. I think, like we said, that even river has life, nature has life, people who take care of nature has life. So this is what keeps me going, this thought and the belief that we can bring about that change. And we're seeing it in our subgroup. We are seeing the conversation moving towards that. So thank you, Steve.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And David, could you just highlight quickly what the particular focus is of the working group at this time?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically the idea there is, you know, following this simple principle: do what you love and love what you do. We want to bring that energy and bringing our music. You know, you remember the group AC/DC. So it's more about getting these authentic conversations for deeper connections. So that's what we are doing there. People are able to be listened. The people can say also what they want to say and hear at the same time. So we're creating safe spaces, you know, around different topics and different what we call case clinic, in which you can just propose a topic or a case, and the rest of the people are bringing their collective energy to it. So we're bringing that into the group, and it's working quite well. There's a lot of engagement there. And then we are also bringing these projects, like, you know, many people are talking now about decentralization. So we got a very interesting project about the decentralized autonomous organizations, or decentralized holistic organizations. So people can join these smaller circles and try to co-create together the next step, because all of these new structures, as you said earlier, they are emerging, and we still got a lot of questions, but we can also co-create it together.
Wonderful. So leading technology, how blockchain is leading with the DHOs and the DAOs in the project of actually how to develop these decentralized organizations. Thank you so much. Let me quickly review some of the things we've been doing in the finance work. We started this a year ago. We came out with a major report last July looking at financing transformation. And there were a couple of key concepts that came forward in it. One was the concept of transformation finance itself, in contrast to what we call progressive finance. Johnny, can you share us that full slide about the different qualities between these different types of finance? We engaged over 36 people in a series of meetings and discussions, and we're still working with them. And they identified, through those discussions, we identified all of these, if you could just keep going, Johnny, all of these different qualities that are distinctive of transformations capital, which is what we're interested in, systems change capital, as opposed to traditional progressive capital. So this provides a framework for us to be able to assess the capital and the financing and how it's actually being applied and whether it's leading us to a systems change direction. You can see most of the people, the 36 people that we engaged, were very excited about this analysis, because they said, finally, somebody has actually said we aren't about impact investing. We're about a liberatory dynamic, embracing the capacity and unlocking the potential, rather than holding the status quo in place. We're about transformation systems change rather than triple bottom line. Of course, these are not mutually exclusive, but we've got to be clear about the goal that we're after, or else we will be taken over by the goals of simply attaining progressive capital. So this is one of the contributions the report made. Now, if we can go on to the next slide, we can get to the second contribution. That's that we move from this is the traditional sort of the image people have of finance. You know, you go to a philanthropy or you get an investment and you put a proposal to them and they pay you the money, invest the money, and you deliver something. We're putting in this one, transformations, what the delivery is. But when we talked with people who were working on this, they've actually have a much bigger and more complex picture of what's needed for being able to do systems finance. So in this next slide, we see the sort of a picture of the system that emerged. And each of these dots is a particular role that's needed for the system to work. And the arrows are exchanges that are needed for the financing system to work properly, the transformation finance system. So we can see that on the top left-hand side, we have, in this case, philanthropic investment in government finance, just as standing in there's other types of finance too. This needs to somehow be blended and aggregated to get to the financing scale and sophistication that we need for systems change finance. And then we still have the implementers here, but most implementers are good at some particular piece of a transformation picture. They cannot transform an entire issue or an entire bioregion, entire community. So we need to put together the implementers to be able to create a real transformation strategy of multiple initiatives. And that's what we call the deal aggregator. Now, between the deal aggregator and the financier, we need some type of broker who's going to connect these two. And all of this takes capacity development. We need to maintain the assessment quality of this. How do we make sure we're achieving success, etc. So this is the concept that emerged, was an ecosystem for financing transformation. Now, out of this project, there arose several activities. One is to develop a platform globally along with others to be able to develop this field of finance so that people will become very good at developing ecosystems for systems change and transformation. One of the projects is Catalyst 30 itself, which adopted a funding ecosystem strategy. So how can we apply this strategy with Catalyst 2030, which is stepping forward to be an honest broker for the development of this system? We'll be talking about that on Friday. As well, we've got a project that's emerging in Costa Rica to develop a regional Costa Rican ecosystem for financing transformation. So we have these three projects. The one is the global platform, one with Costa Rica, and one with Catalyst 2030. So now moving on to our interactive time here, we would just like to be able to break out into these three different breakout groups with the individuals who've been leading the discussion to date. So I'll be working in the finance one, and we can have a discussion about what you're doing or what your interests are in this arena. Our goal is to really advance and speed and accelerate all of our work together. And so that's what we would like to start doing now. So if you can choose, Johnny, you can put forward the breakout rooms, and you can select a breakout room that you're going to be participating in. Johnny, are you there?
Yes, the breakout rooms are open, so you can just select whichever room you want to join. I will also be staying in this main room if anyone's got any questions about the overall working group. So we'll have about 10 minutes in these to join the discussions.
Thank you so much.
And if the co-leads could join their appropriate breakout, that would be fantastic.
Okay, it defeats me totally on my Zoom things and early.
Hey, yeah.
Anyway.
Hi there.
Hello. I'm sorry, we're sort of sitting here watching together, and we missed the button, I think. We were going to join the finance group. Do you know how to?
I can assign you to finance.
Brilliant.
You'll be able to get there'll be a notification coming up now, I think.
Ah, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Great.
I would love to be assigned to finance too, Johnny.
Awesome. I'll send you right there, Mike.
Thanks.
Does anyone else want to go anywhere in particular or ask any questions about the working group?
Hello, could you assign me to the finance group also, please?
Of course.
Thank you.
Are you there, Paco?
And so what you're saying, Joni, is that there's dimensions of narrative in the way in which they affect us, as you can go down further and further into what's the narrative that supports that, what's the narrative that supports that, until you come down to what would call a base narrative, which has the main organizing principles within it, the base value system essence that speaks to it. And when you reach that one, you start to see how all the others have been created as a result of that base narrative.
That's right. And too often we're not addressing the base narrative, we're just finding new stories that are really way too superficial. They're good and they're important, but they're not going to do the work. I put the link up to the unitive narrative that I've been working on with cosmologists and evolutionary biologists and spiritual people. And we're finding that there is no space between science and spirituality and ethics. At the baseline, they're all the same. They're teaching the same things, and they're converging. They're not diverging. They're converging. But that's part of the old narrative, right? Is that science is something very different than ethics, and we can't afford the ethics. We have to, that's all based on deep truths that are going to take generations to weed out of ourselves. Yeah. And we're not going to do it with just feel-good stories about saving a forest, which is a good story, but it's not a narrative that's going to change things.
So just before I go on to the next person to share, we spent time in each of our working group sessions around the narratives that are, or the narrative that's informing who we are in our life right now. And so we go into the deeper understanding of base narrative, because those base narratives about how we show up in the world get us into the level of, I believe, the frame of reference, Joni, that you're speaking to, that allow us to see it not just as a top line story, but as something very deep that's informing deeply around who we see ourselves as, how we relate in the world, what connections we have with others. So I want to honor what you're saying with the form that you've just shared with us is something that we've taken seriously inside the narratives group as well. It is a whole system element that we understand narrative to be.
Yeah, and personal access, I think what you brought up is important. Personal access to new narrative is really important. Like what, how do I step out of the old one, and where does this affect my life? And I don't know that we can step out that easily. It's a process. It happens over time.
Yeah. So as Daya, what about you? What narrative and what it means for you?
Gosh, this is such an inspiring working group to be part of already. I'm so happy I clicked on joining this. A few things. So I am an educator by profession. I teach at a university in Switzerland, and I teach social entrepreneurship particularly. And one of the challenges that I find that, piggybacking off what Joni was saying and yourself also, is the base narrative, is that what we're trying to show to our students is, first of all, setting the stage for how traditional entrepreneurship has been done, where the human factor has been reduced to purely financial profit making at the expense of planetary values, human values, and so many of the other base narratives that make us who we are, right? And we are neglecting so many of the other facets. So my goal for the last, 3-4 years has been to look for not just examples, but also storytelling, to first of all juxtapose the traditional entrepreneur next to the social entrepreneur, the impact entrepreneur, or sustainable entrepreneur. There's a whole spectrum out there, but with the intention also of showing what the perspectives have been for many, many years, and then trying to find avenues to transform them into more, I guess, opening up the mindset and changing the mindset in terms of how they think, how they speak around certain concepts and themes, and then also how they act as humans around it. And I've experimented with a few things, but I'm always looking for new inputs and new insights that I can take to my students, who are our future in many ways.
What is the largest finding that you've had in doing this work that both in finding it, but also maybe surprised you?
What has surprised me most is that, when you, and I guess there are a few things, but the thing that stands out for me most is the generational gap that exists between, let's say, our generation that has been so exposed to very sort of traditional ways of teaching entrepreneurship. And here I'm talking about like transaction cost theories and agency theories, and basically reducing the human to a single nucleus which only acts out of self-interest. And if you don't put sanctions on that individual, that person will seek ways of either destroying you or making money off of you in the most negative of ways, right? And when I talk to my peers who are older professors, they are completely wrapped, and many also, maybe that's a very strong word, but in some ways almost fossilized in that way of thinking. But when you speak to the younger generation, there is such a thirst for different perspectives, different ways of doing things, different ways of coming together. And that I find sometimes shocking that we're not more attuned to that, and that we're not helping that this audience with the right tools and competency, because they are the future leaders and managers and entrepreneurs. And to Joni's point about ethics, we don't teach anything about ethics in entrepreneurship, and it's frightening. It's really frightening.
Oh, Matt, a little bit about you and narrative.
I'm happy to go to Dora because I'm with Catalyst, Leslie. If Dora wants to quickly share a pin before we disappear.
Dora.
Thank you. Yeah, continuing the line, I'm also in education, but I go back even more. So I'd like to work with kids and parents because they are also like decision makers in a way of how they engage with their work in the day-to-days, etc. But I also would like to work around the school and a garden and a whatnot, a community space that can model the new narrative, right? So that's what I'm interested in.
Interesting.
Yes.
Building.
It's just kicked out, I guess.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us again in the group. That was way too short. I think all of us had a taste of too short. Any particular inspiration or idea that somebody wants to share before we go at the top of the hour?
I was struck by the generational perspective that that was shared in our group in terms of how different generations and in their willingness to explore new narratives or those that are fossilized by current narratives, how present that is when we start to get into these underlying themes. Asana gave us some really good examples of how those are, how our place in time, our place in the world, how all of that significantly shapes our openness to new narratives or our willingness to hold on to current.
Any reflections from Nupa or David?
Yeah. Well, it was good energy there. Actually, talking about business structures and a self-evolving organism, which is Catalyst 2030. We're also talking about the next step into this evolution. After the B Corp, the C Corp is coming, and it's still in the oven. So stay tuned. That is our conclusion. I leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Well, in our group, we went around, didn't even finish going around the room for people and how they connect to finance and novel ways of thinking about it. So I would invite you all to carry on the conversation. We meet, each subgroup meets once a month. The subgroup for narrative meets Leslie, do you want to say?
Is it the first Thursday?
Yes.
I'm trying to, because I mean, the first Thursday of every month, we meet at the same time as this particular workshop is today.
Great. If you could put, Johnny, you can put your email in there for people to write to get on the mailing list. That would be great too. Let's see, David, the time you meet.
Yeah, it's the second Thursday each month at 2 p.m. BST or 3 p.m. CEST.
Great.
For 1 hour.
And this month it's going to be the third, because of Catalyzing Change Week, it'll be next week. And so if you want to talk about do's and dows and new business structures, see the C Corp, that's it. We meet in the finance group usually the third Thursday of the month. It's at 10 my time, Eastern time, so that's 2 in the UK, and it's 3 in Europe, and it's, I think, 6:30 in India, if I'm correct, for an hour and a half. So if you want to get on the agenda, contact Johnny and get on the mailing for the agenda. And we look forward to you joining us in making these next economies innovations real and connected. It requires us connecting them all to really make the whole economy. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Gracias. Hasta pronto.